everybody, let's talk about how to write a critique paper. So this paper is one you probably have not done quite this way before. So you might want to take some notes, maybe print out the PowerPoint to help you while you're working. But let's go through the steps of how to do this type of paper. So let me get this rolling here. Oh, and then we got them switched. Okay. So what is a critique? Well, it's a formal critical reading of a passage. You may have done some critiques before. They do these sometimes in art. We do these with film. It is a lot more than, the book was great, I really love this story, I totally agree. That's response, not critique. So in critique, what we're doing is being critical of the argument or the point or the work, just overall the work itself, and how well it is done, good and bad. Okay. So I'm trying to decide a couple of things. So I have a couple of goals with this kind of paper. I am making it clear what the author says, how well those points are made, if there are certain kinds of assumptions that underlie those arguments, what things are left out, because sometimes what an author doesn't include is just as important as what the author does include. And then overall, what implications then can we draw based on our discussion of how well the author has presented those points, what kind of assumptions and flaws may occur in the piece, and then, overall, was this a good write? Is this a strong writing or not? Okay, so critique's job is to force you to look at what you know, believe, and assume. Because if you're very critical about your own thinking and about where the flaws are in your own thinking, you will be a much more well-rounded, deeper, more holistic learner. So part of this is teaching you how to be a critical thinker, to constantly critique, not only so that we can critique other people, but also so that we can critique ourselves. Okay, are the things I think or believe correct? What kind of flaws do I hold in my own thinking? Okay, so that's a big question here, because it's asking you to say, it doesn't matter whether or not I agree with the author. What matters is, did the author fairly present his or her points? Okay, and whether you agree or disagree is not really the point. Okay, so, asking you to sort of withhold judgment, consider their argument, and whether or not it's well done versus whether you agree. Okay, so how do you write a critique? There are 5 sections. The first one is the introduction. Here's what needs to go in there. Number 1, you need to introduce the passage and the author, just like normal in the article. Give the title, give me the author. Okay, so make sure you include all that. Give me the author's main argument. But there are a couple of other points you need to consider also. You also need to make a main point about what you are going to say about how well they have done in presenting their argument. So you will make a point as to whether they present a logical argument or not. Okay, so while these two kind of go together, I didn't mean to do that. These two, you'll give me title, author's main argument, that'll go together as a sentence. Then you're also going to tell me the point that you are going to make overall about how well done is the argument, how logical was the argument. So this one is, was it logical or not? Okay. Also, you may want to do a little bit of this. Give me some background. Why is this topic important? Maybe what some of the background about why, we're talking about this topic, biographical information about the author, if they have a special connection to the topic, maybe circumstances surrounding this piece of writing, when was it written, who wrote it, are those relevant to the topic itself? And one that may be an element to consider is who is supposed to read this, because people write arguments for different kinds of audiences. So the audience can be important. To whom were they writing this piece? Does that matter? So what sort of outside influences may affect the way the author presented their argument? That's kind of what we're looking at with that background. Okay, so that's the first section. I will say typically the introduction is a paragraph. So keep it simple, give me what I need to know, and then we'll move on. But that's part one. Okay, part two, you need to summarize. Okay, give me a summary of the article. Now, you don't need to give me that in the article sentence again, and you already gave me the author's main point. So you're just going to jump right into the summary section. There are two things you need to do in the summary. Hit on all the author's main points. So, what are those main points I would identify? And then number two, what was the author's purpose for writing? Typically, they write to persuade, but just to clarify, overall, what is this author's purpose for writing this? Because that then affects the way we critique it. So the key here is you have to make sure you get the main points right, because if you don't get that right, the next section won't be well done. So you need to really concentrate on what are the author's main points. This will involve you writing, highlighting, note-taking, annotating the piece of writing so that you have a clear understanding of what the author is saying. Okay, so that's what you're doing in this section, is showing me and your reader, I understand what this is about. Because, so that's section two. That may be a paragraph, that may be more than one paragraph. Typically, it shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 paragraphs. Feel free to combine main points together. Okay, so the introduction should be a paragraph. The summary may be a couple of paragraphs. So that's part two. Part three is the critique part. Now, of all the sections, which one do you think should be the longest? In a critique paper, that would be the critique section. So what am I doing in this section of the paper? Well, this is where I'm assessing the writer's argument, okay, the presentation of the author's work. So I'm looking at a couple of things. Number one, how valid is the author's argument overall? Okay, and we'll talk about what to use, to have that conversation. Also, how well does the author achieve his or her purpose? If the purpose is persuasive, how well do they persuade? So what are we looking at to decide these two things? Well, we're trying to decide, is the information the author provides accurate, significant, and logical? And we'll talk about that logic piece. We're going to break down this one piece here for a little bit. Has the author defined his or her terms clearly? Has the author interpreted the information fairly? And do we have logic instead of emotion? So those are some areas to consider when discussing how valid the author's argument is. So what you're going to do then to complete this section is you will go through each of your main points and have a conversation. So whatever main point number one was, you listed up here in the summary. You're now going to then list that almost as your topic sentence and tell us whether that section was logical or not and why. So the why then will be a discussion of the supporting details that the author gives. Do they provide solid facts that are well researched from quality sources, or do they use lots of emotion and logical flaws? And so this main point is not presented logically. So what you're going to do is use those main points you identified in the summary to drive this section here. So essentially each of those main points becomes a body paragraph in this section. It will feel a little repetitive, but that's okay. So I'll list I'll give you main point one and whether it's logical or not, and then I will discuss why or why not, using quotes and evidence from the piece. Then I'll go to main point number two. Same thing. Is it logical or not? Why or why not? Using evidence from the writing. Okay, so this will rely very heavily on the work that you're using. So what we're going through is then critiquing the author's presentation. How good of a job did they do? Okay. So again, some ideas to consider. How accurate is the information? Are the sources good sources? Do the facts seem to be fair? Is it significant? Does this matter? Does the author fairly interpret the information? Does the author clearly define his or her terms? So all of these are issues you consider when you're critiquing. But asking these kinds of questions, of course, will bring these major flaws to the forefront. So when you start asking these questions, that's when these flaws start to become apparent. So in this critique section, when you tell me main point number two, whatever that is not logical because, and some of your because can be because the author says this, and that is an example of faulty cause effect. Okay, so you can use these terms as your why, as to why this main point was not well done. So this just helps give you the vocabulary to express why this was not done well. Because I find a lot of students can read a piece and go, well, this doesn't make any sense. And when I say, but why does it make any sense? They say, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I know that's not, I haven't done that well. Well, what I'm doing here with the flaws is I'm giving you the language of why they didn't do a good job. Okay, so use this to help you. So again, in section 3, in that critique section, maybe I say, okay, main point number 3 is not logical. The author says this, which is an example of hasty generalization. Then the author says this, which is an example of faulty cause effect. Then the author says this, which is just really an emotionally loaded term rather than using logic. So overall, main point number 3 is not a logical point. Then you'd move on to main point number 4. Okay, so use this terminology if you've decided that one of the main points is not logical to explain why. So I'm giving you the vocabulary so you have something to use to explain why it is not. Okay, so then that section 3 should take up a significant portion of your overall paper. It should be far longer. It should be very specific. You use those flaw words. Give me lots of examples from the piece. So that will take you some time. Okay. Section 4 then is a whole lot lighter. I just want you to respond. So this is different than critique. And I give you this section because it just seems to kill students on the inside that I don't ask what they think about the argument. What I'm trying to get you to understand is that critique is different than how you feel about the topic they're discussing. You can completely agree with what the author says overall, her main point. However, you can still say that the author does a terrible job making the argument about that point. Okay. So I want you to understand that there is a difference between the argument itself and how well it is done. So in section 4, the response section, this is where you finally get to let all that out and tell me, do you agree or disagree with the writer's overall ideas? Do you agree that, this should be done or that this shouldn't be done or this policy is good or this policy is bad? So it doesn't have to do much with the logic, although you can discuss, even though I agree with this author, I think this author does a poor job of presenting why. Okay, so you can connect, the author's presentation with your opinion about the overall topic. Okay, and just tell me why or why not. Maybe you totally agree that all kids should go to college, but this writer does a poor job explaining it, and this is why you think all students should go to college. So this is sort of a discussion where you can talk about whether you agree or disagree with the overall points as compared to the author's presentation of or the author's support of why. That's section 4. That should be about a paragraph. Okay. By the way, section 3 should be lots of paragraphs. Section 4, paragraph. Section 5 also should be about a paragraph. So, by the way, make sure you don't combine section 4 and 5. I see a lot of students do that. They need to be separate. Because what you're doing here is concluding. So then overall, how valid did you find the piece? Did the author succeed at his or her purpose? What reaction overall do you have to the author's views? And overall, what were the strengths and weaknesses of the writer's presentation? Okay, so this is kind of hitting on all the different sections of the paper. So you should have 5 sections overall. You're not going to give me headings or anything like that. Just make sure it's clear, using good transitions and topic sentences as we move from section to section. Again, the introduction should be about a paragraph. Summary may be a paragraph or 2. The critique should be lots of paragraphs, lots of support. It's very heavy. Okay, lots of information. Section 4, where you respond, a paragraph, and then make sure you give me a conclusion also. Okay, so that's how to write a critique. If you have any questions after you watch this, feel free to send me an email or stop by and see me. I'm happy to help. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.